Hello and welcome to The Digital Insight, the technology, procurement and supply chain podcast that delivers valuable C-level perspective into the core issues surrounding business transformation and digital disruption. Each episode will bring you the most inspiring executive insights from those who are leading transformation strategies within the world's biggest and best-known companies. The Digital Insight. Disrupt, transform, evolve.
Welcome to The Digital Insight, the official podcast series for CPO strategy and interface magazines. My name is Dale, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Gayle Carpenter, creative director and founder of Sparkloop. Together, Gayle and I discuss her journey as an incredibly successful female entrepreneur, and we explore the glaring lack of female founders and the challenges and barriers that many women face in entrepreneurship. We also take a look at the progress and the real change for good that we've seen over the last 15 years in a truly fantastic and enlightening discussion. Gayle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dale. Nice to have me. Thank you.
No, the pleasure is mine. So I always like to start off by allowing our guests to introduce themselves, to sort of tell our listeners and to tell me who they are and, to put it bluntly, why are we on the show today? So tell us a little bit then about who you are. Tell us about your career journey and your experience to, where you find yourself today in your position with Sparkloop.
So yes, I'm the creative director of a creative agency called Sparkloop. Small and mighty, but pretty successful in that we've been going for 15 years, which is quite an achievement. And now we see ourselves pretty much as busy as ever, which is unusual given the situation we currently find ourselves in. And then a brief background to sort of how I got here, I suppose. I've always been interested in art and design. In fact, except for a minor blip where I started university on a business studies degree, I think to satisfy my dad's expectations of me rather than my own. I quickly flipped out of that into a art and design degree. Fortunately, at the same university, they allowed me, after a few months of realising business studies was probably not the route, for me to actually start an art and design course with them, which was pretty successful, achieved the first, was really happy with that. And as a result, also had some amazing placements whilst at uni, but also then after as a graduate, had some amazing placements with some really well-renowned branding agencies and also some smaller agencies, which really gave me such a great perspective to sort of move forward into my career working through other various agencies until eventually I was sort of given the opportunity to start Sparkloop and have kind of never looked back really from that point.
No, fantastic. And we'll jump into what Sparkloop is, just in a second. But one thing I kind of want to pick apart there is you said that you had a blip. You had that blip and you talked about business studies. Now, obviously at the time, I guess you weren't sure where your career was going to head and what the future held for you. But obviously, as you now where you are now, you started a company, you're a founder, you're very successful. Do you think back to that blip and that business studies period of your life and actually use that to inform some of the kind of decisions you've made over your career, or is that kind of just completely gone and you've gone in a different direction and sort of got there on your own steam as opposed to thinking back to that period of time?
No, I mean, I actually do reflect on it. I mean, it when I think back on it now, the reason why I opted for the business studies degree initially was that despite sort of following sort of an art and design very much sort of English and art through A-levels. I think it was very much a sort of to satisfy my father, who's pretty old school actually, and very much of the sort of thought that, it's okay, girls can do art. And, if you want to get a proper job, you need to do business. And I say that in inverted commas. I mean, the irony is, of course, I am running a creative business. So actually the two things are completely united now. But at the time, it very much was that kind of perception. And quite honestly, I actually didn't tell my dad for a few months when I did switch my course, purely because I thought he would be less than pleased, but actually he did take it quite well in the end. And obviously on reflection, it kind of spurred me on almost to prove him sort of wrong in the fact that, you could be creative and be commercially creative and have a career at the same time. I say a blip, but in fact, it probably, as I say, spurred me on to do more.
So tell us about Sparkloop then. So you described it as small and mighty, and obviously you've said it's very successful. Give us an overview then as to what Sparkloop is. I can't say that today. So tell us what Sparkloop is.
Yes, you need to. Sparkloop, sort of bright ideas over and over is our motto. Essentially, we are an ideas business. We are a creative agency, and we would specialise in branding. That's certainly my first passion. And with that, all of the sort of channels of delivery for that. So whether that's video, digital, good old-fashioned print, we deliver against all of those things. But essentially, I like to sort of say we are an ideas business, and we put sort of people and ideas before platforms. And we've been going for 15 years, and a lot has changed in that time.
Well, and it's great to hear. So tell me then, I always sort of like to frame this question as if you could go back to the start, what would you say, blah, 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 that sort of thing. But I think that's kind of almost kind of a cliche question. But tell me then, you've just admitted there, so much has changed in those 15 years. How have you personally and professionally, but also as a business, kind of had to continuously shift and evolve as that landscape around you changes, alongside it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there are kind of two sides to this question, really. There's one where I would say that actually the fundamentals, a bit like being at school and the 3 R's, the fundamentals of kind of what we do as an ideas business hasn't changed. And especially in terms of branding, I think the kind of the ongoing kind of review of brand and purpose and actually brand identity, like trends change, yes, but the kind of fundamentals of like brand strategy probably haven't all that much. And I think that's on one side, certainly. But then on the other side, of course, everything is just, you can't recognize the kind of the output, if you like, from 15 years ago. The channels in which to deliver that strategy are kind of, beyond your imagination. So I think in order for us to sort of stay ahead, whilst also staying like true to our core skills and core beliefs, I think we also make sure that we're just one step ahead in terms of technology as best as we can. And I think what's interesting is, as a business, our model has really adapted and changed. And the reason why I say we're small and mighty now is I think that we've eventually arrived at that kind of optimal size, if you like, for a creative agency, where we work with more of a collaborative model. We have a smaller core team and then collaborate with others who are really, really ahead of the game in really specialist areas. So that enables us to, provide the core and then sort of link in with others who are just way ahead of anyone else in terms of like whether that be the latest technology or innovations. And it's taken us a while to sort of get to that model, to realise sometimes always like bigger isn't better, especially in the ideas business.
And what about in terms of when you started out, and you quite rightly so, you talked about a lot of things like the channels changing, the technology and the sort of the model eventually adapting and evolving. What about in terms of, I'm not saying name the clients you work with, but the people that you're having the conversations with, the people that are coming to you and asking for ideas and asking you to kind of help them with their branding and that sort of thing. What about their expectations and their sort of, I don't want to say demands, but what they need and want from a business like Sparkloop? How have those conversations changed? Like in terms of, I guess at one point you started out and you were almost selling to them in terms of this is why you should come to our business. But now are people coming to you because they've seen how successful you are and they've seen that you've got those specialists in those areas who are better than other people in the market and that sort of thing? Like, yeah, just give me a bit of an idea how that dynamic has changed.
I would say that we're really fortunate actually to have still two of our founding clients, and they're great to work with. We've really kind of grown and evolved with them, and that's not without its challenges as well to keep them sort of on board and make sure they don't sort of run after the next sort of shiny thing that's available to them. And I think what I find is they do come back because of our sort of like core values, but in terms of conversations with new clients, actually, I would say sometimes the conversation gets harder because a lot of people, can access anything they want on the internet and think anything is possible, and that there is no skill now involved in kind of creating a website or an app. Like you can kind of do it from your smartphone. I mean, that's the perception, right or wrong, that you can do everything. There's an app for that. There's something available. It's free. And a lot of people, especially sort of starting out, have a real disconnect with actually how much skill and time things take. So I think, funnily enough, I don't think the conversation has changed massively, that we've always had a real challenge to kind of win clients over, especially in the times in terms of like the sort of planning and strategy phase, and really getting them to understand the value of that, and understanding that if that sort of top piece of work isn't right, then it doesn't matter what they produce. It's not gonna work for them as they think it might. I don't know if that answers your question exactly. But yeah, that's certainly the challenge we face, and I think what goes with that is, people think things, budgets are, really challenged constantly, now more than ever. I think due to people believing that there's just a simple solution that already exists for everything.
No, I find that really fascinating, because obviously I speak to a lot of people in sort of like leadership roles, executive roles, technology roles, and so it's always fascinating to hear both sides of that conversation, because obviously you have the people who are out there championing the technology, the solution, saying, yep, this will kind of really provide answers for many questions, but then there are other people who are like you've just said, who think that's the solution, and ultimately everyone always says to me the same thing eventually, that there is no one, I will use a cliche, there is no one size fits all. There is no one thing that's going to suit everybody's needs. And it's always fascinating to hear both sides try and argue, not a point, but kind of sort of state their case, but actually you sort of, the conversation always comes to the same point in the middle, that, yeah, there's so much out there that it just goes back to kind of the conversation needs to be what it always has been, about what the client needs, what the person needs, rather than we've got this, you should have it, so to speak.
Absolutely right. I think it's for me, it's really just trying to find the best of both worlds, and I see so much of the time clients really trying to over-engineer things sometimes, and what we try and help them do is say, right, let's get to understand what your the core of your brand is, and then let's look at the most efficient way that we can help that be across all your channels, because and there are so many options in which to do that, but let's not over engineer it, and of course clients will always come with this, we want this solution, we want this outcome, so it's your job to really kind of find the best route to that, and a lot of the time they're not kind of interested in a lot of the thinking that goes into that arrival point, if you like. They just want the answer.
So let's look at then something that shift tact, as it were, to something that I know is very near and dear to your heart, and that's obviously kind of for obvious reasons, but that's female entrepreneurship. Obviously being a very successful female founder yourself, and last year, sort of late 2019, a report was released, the Alison Rose Review of Female Entrepreneurship, and that looked at the barriers faced by women starting and growing businesses. And it also identified ways of unlocking this so-called, untapped talent. and some of the key figures that came out of that were that it said that it's only 1 in 3 UK entrepreneurs, is female, equating to a gender gap of around 1.1 million businesses. Now, obviously, like I say, and it's very clear, you are a successful female entrepreneur. tell me a little bit about why you think there is such a gap, why there are so few female founders.
I mean, I think we have to go back to it's the perception of females in leading roles. I think there's rightly or wrongly, my dad, who bless his soul, his sort of attitude towards sort of girls in business, he was really old school and old fashioned, and that's fine. But, have we actually moved on that much? There still is that perception that, if you were to start a family, you will be at home, potentially, or you're the one who will take a step back in order to do that. There are so many things that we like to think don't exist, and that there are all these superhuman women out there, but actually the reality is we're all human, and we do actually have these kind of challenges, and they're nice challenges. I am certainly not complaining. I'm a mother myself, but it is true, they are things that do make it more of a challenge for women, and I think naturally women also maybe potentially less risk adverse. And just do kind of revert to those kind of more conventional roles, which mean that we'll take a step back in order to sort of support the rest of our family, for example. And that is a reality, I believe, still.
And you sort of said it yourself, that kind of one of those initial kind of barriers, let's use that word, was your own father sort of saying that kind of old school belief of women in business, it's a man's world and that sort of thing. But what other kind of, particularly obviously as you started out Sparkloop and as your journey's progressed over these last 15 years, and I know obviously you've been very successful, but obviously that's not to say you've not had any challenges. What kind of barriers and what kind of examples have you seen where even as a successful leader, you're still kind of coming up against a brick wall, so to speak, and you are sort of coming up against that old school attitude?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I do genuinely very much see still sort of that kind of old boys network idea at play. And again, I navigate around that. We have some amazing clients, both male and female. I'm not a boy basher. I like to point out at all, and I think you kind of find your own, start to find your own network, and that's actually really what I'm seeing now, is that the old boys network is kind of being replaced by a much more kind of diverse network of people who are like-minded, as opposed to just kind of like who you know rather than what you know. Which is actually really, really nice. But that said, the barriers that maybe I've seen myself has been through business, generally being in very male-dominated teams, and when I was at sort of creative head level, certainly I was one of few creative heads, and the usual kind of stereotypical responses to kind of my opinions or whatever would come out. I would always be known as feisty as opposed to kind of assertive, and yet the ego-driven kind of creative director who would throw hissy fits constantly would be just eccentric and creative and wonderful. It's interesting how naturally we're labelled, and how that's just so set within the sort of psyche, if you like. I am seeing it change, though, definitely.
It's for all the wrong reasons. I find it fascinating, and I don't mean that as in like it blows my mind, because I speak to so many people, I speak to so many men and women in leadership roles, and it's so kind of consistent and common, the kind of conversations across those the industries and across kind of sectors and that sort of thing, that sometimes I just wish I could sort of sit there and be a fly on the wall and just sort of see it happen, because sometimes things get said that I think that can't be right. Like, there's no way I can imagine two people saying that to another person, but here we are. Looking then at one thing that always comes up a lot is sort of positive role models. It's people like yourself in positions, in successful positions, doing something and doing more and opening doors and empowering next generation of females to have the better opportunities. What sort of stuff have you done and do you do as part of your, as part of your position, and what kind of responsibilities do you take on to kind of, open the door for more women, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my approach is a much softer one, perhaps, than one that's sort of, scream and shout about. But I would say I take much more of a sort of mentoring role. I like nothing more when I sort of start to work with or collaborate with clients or other people in my sector that actually can start off relatively junior and then almost kind of outpace me. And that's almost like a sign of success in terms of how they've grown. And, I never sort of set out to sort of do it, in a structured way, let's say, but always, I don't know what it is, but I've worked with quite a lot of people in client roles, say in marketing, who have just naturally sort of asked me for advice or a kind of 360 feedback, and that's kind of turned into more of a conversation and a bit of mentorship, where they've then gone on to do really great things and felt that, they can have the confidence and the voice to do things, which is really heartwarming for me. So it's kind of those small gestures rather than any sort of grand gesture, I think, that I would look towards. And also the fact that even my team, I don't know that we've necessarily set out to be this way, but we are really nicely diverse. And I do have like my right hand woman, as I call her, is also a great senior creative, and I've brought her on from a junior to that point, and we're still work brilliantly together. So just small gestures, I think, can make such a difference to individuals and their careers. One client, for example, who was in a marketing role, client side, junior, worked with her all the way through, and eventually she did break away and start her own business, and was super flattered that she came to us for all of her branding, for her startup brand, helped her with the Kickstarter campaign, really, really did great things. And their objective was to go on and sell that business, and they did so, and they did it within 5 years. And that showed me a really beautiful life cycle of kind of mentoring to supplier, and it really deepens relationships as well, with sort of ongoing clients as well, which is great.
And what about for you in terms of your own personal journey? Have you kind of ever sort of been under the, taken under the wing of a mentor, or kind of followed that sort of, you're talking about that now, but going back towards your own kind of development, have you sort of had that experience firsthand of, being mentored or sort of looking up to a role model in the business space?
Funnily enough, I hadn't really thought about this until possibly now, so much. But in my one of my very early placements, actually, when I was at university, I was fortunate enough to work with a really large agency, which was wonderful from a kind of really great global experience. And then actually a much smaller agency, which was headed up by a male and female team. And I actually then subsequently went on, after one or two job roles, to go back and work for them. And it was probably one of the happiest places I've worked, most enjoyable, fantastic work, but also looking back on that now, I think it is because of that dynamic. And this particular creative head, who was female, she had children, she had a family, she had other things going on in her life. And the one thing I will say, what I really enjoyed, and what I've identified about a lot of great female leaders, is that they are kind but firm, and have a real tenacity about them. And I think those are the qualities I would like to draw on myself. And certainly, it's funny talking about this now, I didn't realise actually how much of an impact perhaps that particular personal situation has had that effect on me. Because actually it's unusual. It's probably the only time within my career where I have been working for a female head, which is unusual. So actually to start out as I mean to go on has probably stood me in some really good stead there, I think.
And something you've said that's come up again with other females, with other women in leadership roles, has been this idea, the notion that you're not boy bashing. This isn't a sort of a conversation where you know, as much as you're opening the doors for women, you're not closing the door on men, you know, and a lot of people have kind of felt it necessary to make that point clear, that as much as you want more empowerment for women, it's not saying in place of the men in the industry. It's just creating a bit more of a balance. Have you sort of had to come up against this where, and like you said, you've not necessarily directly gone out and kind of forced the conversation, but just naturally it sort of happened. But have you sort of seen it where the work you've done, the kind of that mindset of wanting more women in leadership roles has come up against that sort of dismissal? Because there's that fear of, well, you're actually removing opportunities for men, which we know you're not.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that sort of general sense of it, isn't there? Kind of, if people don't really understand or don't look into any detail, that it would be a very sort of sweeping comment, wouldn't it? And I mean, 100%. I mean, I think, to be honest, I feel it's way beyond the male-female conversation anyway. I think it's way beyond that. I think it's a much bigger sort of diversity conversation, full stop. But obviously I can only talk as a female. Certainly I would hate to feel that I'm just sort of banging that drum for female equality. I do think it is moving in the right direction. And I've got a son, and I want to be a role model as much for him as I do for other women, to know that it's right and fair to be in this sort of, have this kind of diverse attitude or mindset going forward, and I certainly see that playing out in him, which is wonderful. He doesn't see sort of male female roles in the same way that we ever would have as kids, so that's fantastic. And I have to say a big shout out to my other half, who works in the financial sector. It's not exactly known as the most diverse, perhaps, or female-led industry either. But he's been really great in terms of like sharing roles and responsibilities, and I think that's made an enormous difference as well to what I've been able to achieve as both a mother and a business owner. So there's a lot to be said for that. In fact, some of his favourite roles have been where he's had female bosses, which is unusual. But he says they've often had a more diverse team as a result and been more successful.
No, of course. And following on from that line, we've talked about the gaps, we've talked about the challenges, but you yourself said that while there's still quite a lot of work to do, you actually have seen change for good. You actually have seen some really positive steps over not just the last 15 years, but just focusing specifically on your experiences there, that you've seen good things happen. What would you, I'm not going to say, tell me the best things you've seen, but obviously, what would you consider to be kind of key successes in this space regarding kind of, the more diversifying of voices that you're dealing with and the clients you're dealing with and that sort of thing? Like, what are some of the good things you've seen from a female leader's perspective?
Yeah, there certainly have been lots of positive steps forward. I mean, that we're more freely talking about it, and it's really just sort of part of everyday conversation is fantastic. Also, that, I mean, genuinely, I am seeing and talking and connecting with more females, other females. So it's actually a lot more split now in terms of who I'm dealing with, who I'm seeing are decision makers. It really is there is real blend, and that's really reassuring. And that's just my personal experience. That's not worth looking at statistics or anything else. It really is just, I'm noticing that I'm working with more women who have more decision-making powers and are kind of moving things forward, or are even taking, willing to, with support, take more risks into starting their own businesses or being entrepreneurs themselves. So, I mean, that's fantastic. But again, as I say, all within balance.
Obviously, the last two questions then for you, and I ask everybody these sort of two questions, but specifically then in terms of your own mindset, your own approach to just sort of being a female leader, how do you ensure that you're kind of constantly challenging your own thinking, that you're moving and you're shifting with the landscape around you, and you're not sitting there and sort of saying, well, I'm very successful, I've got to the top of the game, I can put my feet up now and and just watch it happen around me? Like, how do you keep pushing yourself?
Well, I've not really had time to stop and think about that properly, so that probably answers the question to a point. I think it's more around sort of motivation, isn't it? I think naturally you have to have a certain mindset or ambition to start with, right? And then it's kind of like, how do you maintain that motivation? And I think if you have that sort of natural instinct in you, it's kind of hard to let go of. So, I'm constantly trying to stay one step ahead of myself. I'm always challenging myself. I talk to other female leaders and use their mentorship as well to kind of spur me on. Not just females, I hasten to add. And then I think I constantly just, learn, test, improve, and sort of move forward. I think if you stay still, it's boring. And to keep your energy going, you always have to look ahead and find energy in that, rather than thinking it's going to be tiresome. So I don't know what it feels like to put your feet up, to be honest.
And you sort of answered this question with that question, but I'm going to ask you, because it's always nice to sort of get everybody's ideas, everyone's perspectives. And I think you probably could just see the last question for my answer. But what's one thing that you have always thought, you've always believed, you've always followed, that you think has been key to succeeding? And I don't mean a guarantee of success, but just something that no matter what happens, if you have stayed true to this sort of belief, you're heading in the right direction. What would that be?
I guess it is pretty much recapping what I've just said. Stay true to yourself. Absolutely. Don't be something you're not. I mean, again, if we're going to think about, as a female, I would say don't try and be a man. Be who you are and have confidence in that. Really never take the eye off the ball. Really look after your clients, as well as really valuing your team, and that will pay you back in dividends for sure. But most importantly, probably don't be afraid of failure. Do test, learn, challenge yourself, keep moving forward, and be prepared to take measured risks, because that's the only way that you'll grow, by learning from mistakes and failures. You'll do better in the long run.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Insight Podcast in association with the Interface.net and CPOstrategy.com. The Digital Insight is brought to you by B2E Media Limited. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate and review. And don't forget to check out our podcast archive at www.b2e-media.com/The Digital Insight.